Welcome back, everyone. This is the Earthdawn Survival Guide podcast. I am, of course, Dan. With me on the other end of the microphone is Josh.
Hello, everybody.
And on
podcast for novices and masters alike.
Oh, yes. And today we will be talking about all things quizzical, multifunctional, and in fact, pronunciational. We will be talking about philo subtegeminis. So that's your Latin for the day. And that's my Latin for the year, and I'm done with Latin. We'll be talking about threads a little later on, but first we have some emails to get to, and I'm pretty sure everyone wants Josh's answers and not mine, so I'll be asking the questions on behalf of you, the listeners. But if you have your own questions about anything you've heard us talk about in the previous 12.5 podcasts or this one today, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com, and Josh will make sure we get them read to you on the next podcast down the line. So
yes, before we get to the questions, though, I actually do want to mention something here real quickly because I sort of need to make this public. So a couple of episodes ago, there was a question about one of Joel's questions was about modifiers.
Okay, not the big secret.
Not the big secret.
Okay,
no,
gotcha.
I don't know what big secret he's talking about.
Me neither. I haven't heard of it.
No, about the modifiers and when they applied. I, as part of my answer on that, kind of made a glib, offhand comment that I realize might lacks a lot of context for everybody who would be listening and want to kind of like publicly mea culpa this. Mm-hmm. Which is that I like gave an answer and then said that Morgan would probably be upset with me if my interpretation didn't match his. That is I realize that is a sort of an internal, I didn't get in trouble, but that is an internal sort of joke between Morgan and myself. Mm-hmm. We have been working very closely together for many years. Yes. And we work really well together. And I absolutely appreciate the effort. A lot of the sort of commentary that I've been giving about the disciplines, Morgan did a lot of the work on deciding the optional talents and kind of like defining the thematic lines for the different disciplines and how you can do different approaches to them and how like the talent choices and whatnot all kind of play into certain themes. He did a lot of the work on that. He really did. And so a lot of what I've been providing as commentary on these, setting aside the historical context of where talents might have been and changes that were made. But a lot of the choices and, this plays into the theme of like defense, or this plays into the theme of perception that goes in for a lot of those disciplines is really a lot of his work.
So we have spent 16 episodes of the podcast not giving enough credit to Morgan Weeks, part of the other developer on the team.
And so my comment about like that he would be upset with me is largely the knack that I have of being a little bit more glib and off the cuff and freeform in terms of giving my rulings and decisions on stuff that do not necessarily line up with the ideas that he had in mind when doing some of the mechanical work, and he has done a lot of mechanical work.
Yes.
So that was not intended in any way
as a slight to Morgan. It was
as a slight to Morgan at all. It is absolutely a like, it is more of a self-deprecating, like I've given an answer and it might be that it was actually intended to work a certain way, and I have said something that is different from that, and that is my that is absolutely my screw up. And again, a lot of the, some of the other comments that I make and so forth are the result of discussions that I have had with him, that we have had within the Earthdawn design team, because of how much work he has done on the underlying mechanics and everything relating to that. So that is absolutely, full credit to Morgan. I try and say as often as I can that, while in some ways it is absolutely a team effort and a collaboration. We would not be where we are without him and Kyle and Carl and Michael and Andy, in terms of getting these books done and out the door. I will be completely honest. When we were getting towards the end of the, like in sort of the midst of the original Kickstarter development and trying to get books out, before we really brought like the other people on as more full-fledged members of the team, I was absolutely drowning in terms of just not being able to get stuff done. And it is absolutely through their support and help and effort that it did.
Contributions, yes.
So you may have noticed that if you look at the credits in the more recent books, that it has shifted from me being credited as line developer to there being an Earthdawn. Like there's a project lead, the person who is creatively sort of in charge of that project. And then there's the development team. And my knack for understanding and keeping in my head the broader shape of the story of Barsaive and Earthdawn and stuff, even if I don't necessarily have all of the specific details being able to call to mind, I tend to know where to look to find things. And having a good, what I believe is a good, strong understanding of story, both from a broad storytelling standpoint, but also from how to apply that in particular to role-playing games and writing adventures and storylines that player characters get involved with. I think that is a strength that I bring to things. Whereas, as I have admitted multiple times, I am not a huge number cruncher, super tactical. Like, I like them. I have no problems with them. I've done a lot of work analyzing the numbers, but I do not have
your math nerd only goes so far.
Yeah. Like, that we each bring our own particular strengths to the table. Morgan brings an absolute wealth of valuable support to things. And, so do not let anybody think that my off the cuff comment a couple of weeks ago, was anything except, deepest appreciation on my part for Morgan and an inside joke, and more intended as and I've probably screwed something up. So like that is all on me, in that regard.
So on behalf of Morgan and the rest of the team, who finally are getting their credit spoken publicly, Josh is merely the public face.
I am, yeah. And that's the other thing that is I think interact well with the audience and the fan base.
So far, all of our feedback has been positive.
So, again, finding like people to help, especially where this is like done in spare time and whatnot, absolutely could not do it without them. And so,
yes.
Again, it was intended more as and I am frequently an idiot and don't know what I'm talking about. So take that as it is.
It's a podcast. So we won't lose any advertisers because it's only a podcast. So we're okay there.
So with that, on to questions where I will endeavor to do my best to answer, but understand that,
that's you. We got a fantastically long, detailed, gushing story about someone else's love of Earthdawn, as deep as ours is, in fact, from a guy named Matthew. And I love people named Matthew.
Yes.
So, but we're not going to read that whole thing on the air. I think Josh's apology covered our time frame on that one.
Yes, blame it on me. That's fine. I'm accepting. It's been one of those weeks.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's an inside joke between Josh and me. So he has about 4 questions for us as well, but I will read all of these as I possibly can. On episode 3 of the podcast, he's keeping track, we're not, we went through how to pronounce the name of the passions, but we left out one of them.
Yes, apparently. I did not go back to check to see if we actually did and it just got like swallowed or whatever.
I didn't. Well, there's 12 of them.
It's
so
possible.
We got
the one that he said we missed was Floranus, which is how I pronounce it. It does have a double, as in 2 of them. U, not a W, a double U. And so I would also accept Floranus, although that extra syllable really strikes me as awkward when I'm saying it.
Yeah. My brother, the linguist, my late brother, the linguist, actually always pronounced it as Floranuus.
That's it. that actually could work. that is, yeah. If you came to me and said, this being is called Floranuus, I probably would not spell it that way, but that's just me.
No, I agree. I agree with you. My brother studied 17 languages.
Yeah.
So
if you're going with that doubled letter, that would indicate either something like it's held longer. So it would be Floranus.
Yeah.
Or like as a distinctive broken second, like additional syllable.
Or maybe it's Nordic, Floranus.
Floranus is usually how I do it. I don't drag out the extended U Floranuus never occurred to me, because I would usually spell that with a Y and do something funky to indicate the actual syllable breaks a bit more clearly.
Because the only other word I can think of that has a double U.
I would avoid extraneous apostrophes because those bug me, but that's an entirely different rant.
Oh, totally. The only other word I can think of that has a double U is vacuum.
Vacuum, yeah. So Floranuus. If you're going to...
Yes, would make absolute sense to me. So I think Floranuus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a...
It's a made-up word, so go with whatever you want. So, that's it. He also never knows what to do with the double U's. And like I said, this is the only word I can think of is vacuum. The only one I can think of off the top of my head. So, next question. In episode 10, he really is keeping track. He's like powering through these podcasts. During the Dwarf Primer, there wasn't a lot said about the Scythan dwarves.
No, that's true.
There are also very few references to them in the 4th edition books that aren't weapon-related or about when they started losing their children before the Scourge. Are all the Scythan dwarves essentially gone now? Perhaps fully integrated into the Thrall at this point?
Yeah, probably. It's, so he's referring to up in northeastern Barsaive. So you've got the Thrall Mountains and the Kingdom of Thrall, which are kind of in the middle of the province, roughly speaking, geographically. Just northeast of those, on the other side of the Serpent River from the Thrall Mountains, are the Kaukovic Mountains. And those are divided largely because you've got the river running between them, but more or less they're sort of one contiguous mountain range, geographically speaking. And then beyond that, a little bit further north, when you start getting almost up to the edge of Barsaive, you've got a smaller mountain range called the Scythan Mountains. And there was, and it's referenced in, I think, the Thrall source book, the Kingdom of Thrall source book, when you're talking about the history of that a little bit, that there was a separate dwarf kingdom that existed there prior to the Scourge, but they suffered pretty badly at the hands of the Scourge, and there is not a lot of information about them. There have always been some ideas floating around in the greater sort of Earthdawn whatever about, not just 4th edition, but just in previous editions and whatnot, about the Scythan dwarves in the former kingdom of Scytha. I think a lot of the survivors of that, when they started having the problems there, that the kingdom largely collapsed and that these survivors either have been sort of scattered to the various small villages and whatnot, or largely integrated with the kingdom of Thrall. That's, and that there, I know that, and this actually ties in a little bit to his next question.
Yes.
With regards to, you could certainly look at that as dwarves of Scythan heritage within the Kingdom of Thrall might be, even after all these centuries, continue to sort of try and maintain that cultural identity, in the same way that you have the different broader speaking clan factions in Thrall as well. But no, it's not something that is addressed much in 4th edition, largely because we haven't really decided what, if anything, we're going to do with it. Scytha.
So feel free to submit an essay.
Scytha is similar in some respects to the fallen the fallen troll kingdom of Ustrecht. Is similar in some, also in some respects to Landis, the fallen human kingdom in Southwest Barsaive. In that it is an area that was a significant power before the Scourge, has since basically ceased to exist except in legends and history, and there may be people that are interested in rebuilding it in some way. I think because we have the Dwarf Kingdom of Thrall, there is less of an intention to do anything with them as far as expanding dwarf culture. Like the way that you have with the elves and Bloodwood, the way that you have with the orcs and Carafad, the way that you have with the Tiskrang and like the Serpent River. There's no fallen Tiskrang nation, broadly speaking. Like you've got, say, House Ticambris, which was kind of wiped out and is back in a different form these days.
Yeah.
But there's just not a lot about them, and largely because we haven't decided what, if anything, was to be done with them, because there wasn't really a whole lot that was left in previous notes and whatnot that was planned for them. I think it's one of those sort of vaguely blank spaces on the map that, at least for now, people should feel free to do what they want with.
Yeah, fair enough. We'll fill in those later, maybe ever. In the 4th edition timeline, we've made it to 1517, and he really likes the changes so far, so good on you. I also know the Barsaive and Chaos 2nd edition book has been retconned, but is there anything in there that still made the current outline? More Horror Cloud problems, Horror Stalkers, March of the Undead?
Well, so Horror Stalkers came back They appear in the Mystic Paths book, which is available in PDF, and we are waiting for the printer to tell us that they have finished actually assembling the physical books and ship them to our supplier so we can start shipping them out. As of this recording,
we will let you know when we get them.
We are still waiting on that. We are in fact supposed to get a picture of one of the assembled deluxe editions like this week. And I have not seen it yet.
Yeah.
So the Horror Stalkers, like in terms of like the storyline that was in Barsaive and Chaos with regards to the Horror Stalkers, no, we didn't really do anything with that. But the Horror Stalker exists and has an essay and a full sort of 4th edition write-up as a path in the Mystic Paths book. So take a look there. Yes. It's a really good essay, as is all of the material in there. That was a fantastic.
Shameless plug.
There are fragments of the horror cloud still floating around. Mm-hmm. We are aware of that and may or may not deal with them at some point in the future. You know, the major, like the full Stormhead itself was broken up. It does mention in the 4th edition timeline that there are little fragments still drifting around, but we haven't really done anything as far as focusing on them as a threat. The March of the Undead from Parlanthe to Vivane is not a thing. I had...
We'll lay the undead there.
Yeah. So we still figuratively speaking, nuked Vivane. Like the city is destroyed. The idea that I had for handling it, I was never super crazy about the idea of turning it into a city of undead as a result of having the result of the horror cloud being that it's now a city of the undead, because we've already got Parlanthe. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like, oh, well, let's do another one of those. I don't know. It doesn't seem necessary. It doesn't seem particularly like, I'm sure that it is possible to take that idea and do something different with it than you do with the Cadaver Men and Twiceborn and stuff in Parlanthe. But if you are going to have the Cadaver Men have the undead nation, Twiceborn's kingdom, migrate from Parlanthe to Vivane, then you are just transplanting it. You're not necessarily doing anything new or different. I could see reasons for it to happen. It's just, and this may be a result of the 2nd edition team's execution of the idea. It didn't grasp me in any way. I admit I like to see, things get brought up. Like I was saying the other week about the named horrors, right? Like, yes. I don't want to, this is both just sort of a design idea, but also like, I don't want to have something just be a reprint or a retread of a previous idea. I want to have something in it that is new or have a different take on it, or something that will capture me as far as an idea, as a good project to pursue.
Because that's the Earthdawn way. Is we took a fantasy idea
in some regards,
turned it on its head.
Like from one standpoint, the march of the Cadaver Men from Parlanthe to Vivane, I can understand maybe why they might want to leave. Parlanthe is not exactly conducive to long-term survival. There's still a lot of nasty stuff there, yes. and moving to Vivane. And I know in some of Lou's notes from the tail end of the 1st edition days that there was the idea potentially of using the stuff that happened in Vivane to introduce some new types of undead. Mm-hmm. One of the big question marks that he had marked on there was maybe we actually are able to bring vampires into Earthdawn, which is a scary thought. I think we might have talked about vampires before on the show, but I know that like I've brought it up in the past, and that is that blood magic being what it is in Earthdawn, vampires are to do them right opens up a whole different kind of can of worms.
That would be a scary threat.
So that is ultimately why I'm not going to have, I am not interested in having the Cadaver Kingdom move from Parlanthe to Vivane. I liked the idea, and I kind of laid some of the groundwork for this in the write-up in the Game Master's Guide of looking at Vivane and the present situation in Vivane, inspired a little bit by like super chaotic time of the post-monarchy French Revolution up until the Napoleonic, till Napoleon kind of took power, where you're dealing with this brand new sort of revolutionary we're building a new society and it's going to be great, but people are still basically awful. And we've got somebody, we've got somebody who is now in power there, who is using it for their own sort of self-aggrandizement and personal benefit, as opposed to, say, the more positive direction that the original sort of leader of the Barsaivian resistance might have been at. And so we've got a lot of stuff. I can never remember off the top of my head what that period of time was called in sort of like during the French Revolution, where you've got Robespierre and that like period of like 10 to 15 years or so between the death of Louis XVI and the ascension of Napoleon, where like everybody was losing their heads. Like it was a crazy, crazy time. And I really liked the idea of, I
call that Guillotine the board game.
There's a card game called Guillotine. It's actually a pretty good.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Is the Guillotine the card game? Is I have that from.
I liked the idea of, okay, you had the situation where there was the Theran superiors and the Barsaivian underclass, and this war and the cataclysmic event that happened to the city as a result of the horror cloud basically flips that relationship on its head. And like the Therans who were left behind without any real support from the Empire are now in a position where they're sort of maybe the underclass, and what that dynamic can be and the potential situation and stories, and to have a place where like things are kind of maybe awful and not great, and it's not necessarily the fault of the horrors like so many other things are, that this is just a situation where people who have been oppressed for a really long time suddenly are in a position where they are in power and are being led by a demagogue, and all of the garbage stuff that can happen as a result of that. Like, I just, it strikes me as a really, really interesting situation, that can arise there. And that interests me and excites me. And I can't wait till I have time to actually work on the Vivane book, but that is down the road.
Yes. so far away. By the way, the Bourbon Restoration was the period of the.
No, not the fall of Napoleon. I'm thinking before Napoleon. It was called like the Troubles, or no, the Troubles was Ireland. The Terror. Like we're talking like specifically revolutionary, like when they changed the calendar to be decimal. Like it was 10 months, and each week had like 10 days, and they were breaking hours.
Yeah, and they changed.
Yeah, and like they
made the day at 10 hours long, and each hour was 100 minutes, and so forth and so on.
And they were like doing stuff, and like all of the churches were like converted into temples to reason. Like it was like the Enlightenment, like with the crazy dial turned up to 11. It's a fascinating period of history.
Exactly.
That not a lot of people like really know a lot about in the US.
Yeah.
I love looking at it as an example of how good-intentioned revolution can go so badly wrong if the wrong people end up in charge. And that's basically what's going on in Vivane, which is why, like, we don't need to march the undead there. We've already got a really unstable, bizarre situation going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, you got a bag of chaos going on as it is. So anyway, last little point from Matthew before we move on to anything else. Says anything we can share on the new Iopos book and how it will be up on Kickstarter, and he wants us to take his money.
We will be happy to take your money when it becomes available. I am...
I mean, you want to donate
I
sooner,
am working on the preliminary layout for the Iopos book. As of right now, the book is slated to have 8 chapters. We've got 5 of them... hold on. Sorry, not if I'm including like the introductory the introductory credits and whatnot. It's 9 chapters. 3, 4, 5, 6 of them are through preliminary layout. I'm doing some work on a chapter that's dedicated to the passions. We've got and then a couple of other chapters that are like in almost done with development, and we'll be going to editing, and hopefully I will be getting them to put into preliminary layout the end of this week as we record this, the first week of March. As soon as we have the preliminary layout done so that the book is locked down, basically, and that we have a book that when the campaign ends, we can, boom, deliver that pre-release layout draft to all of the backers, we'll be launching the campaign. We don't have an exact date yet. We are hoping, knock on wood, that we will actually be able to be launching that soon. I'm not going to say anything more specific than that because
there's like a definitive date.
But like preliminary.
Soon.
So like I said, nine chapters. 6 of them are through preliminary layout. So 2/3, roughly, in terms of chapter count, 2/3 of the way through. One of those chapters that is done is the largest chapter in the book, which is the geography that like goes through all of the different parts of the city and talks about the people there. That chapter is through layout. So in terms of actual page count and numbers, we're actually more than 2/3 of the way through.
You're 3/4 of the way laid out. So
pay attention to our social media on Facebook, Discord channel if you're not in there. Follow me on Twitter. The Earthdawn Guild. Like we will be, when we have a date, we will be announcing, hey, it's coming up on this date.
But tell me we're going to have a map of Iopos.
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. We would like to.
Okay. Because the map of Travar was
The map of Travar was, I absolutely agree. The map of Travar was awesome. I am not involved directly in those decisions, so I am not sure. Do not quote me or anything in regards to that. I am not in charge of the art.
We'll just blame it on the rest of the team.
I'm doing layout for the book, but I am not in charge of art procurement or maps or any of that stuff. Yep.
It's okay. Just had to check on behalf of the listeners. All right. So we have one last question from Aaron Devereaux. And I think we got your name right because we talked French all day long. So last question here, then we can move on to the other half of the podcast. So, hi guys, hope you keep enjoying and keep going with the podcast. Well, I'm enjoying it. Are you?
I am. Yes. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to Aaron.
Yeah.
You're talking to me.
No. Yeah.
We'll keep going.
We'll keep going. I got no problem with that. As long as Josh...
Please try and get me to shut up about Earthdawn for 5 minutes.
Only when he's sleeping. I still think he might even mumble in his sleep about Earthdawn. So that's just me. It pumps through his veins like giant rubber pants.
Vast and jazz.
Yes.
Vergigorm.
Ron's question is, how and why did the decision to make the cost of increasing talents for additional disciplines after the first discipline happen? First edition doesn't do this, he claims. Is it just a case of using what third edition had with no further thought about it?
Oh no,
or
there's a lot of thought behind this.
I think so
okay. This is a result of basically a consequence of the fundamental nature of the Fibonacci series advancement table for raising talents and advancing your circle as a discipline. That as you advance your character, it gets progressively more expensive to raise your talents and consequently to advance in your circle. I have a spreadsheet that I did back in the day that basically calculated the minimum number of legend points required to advance from circle to circle.
Yes, I love that chart.
And basically it basically, like, the amount of time and the amount of legend points required basically is a sort of increasing, steepening curve. I am making hand gestures here that Dan can see because of our video chat, but you folks listening at home cannot. But basically, imagine like if you have a flat line, if you've got then like a steady, like straight line going up, as things increase. But what happens with Earthdawn is that it's actually a curve, kind of like, asymptotically approaching infinity, if you were to theoretically kind of carry out the function graph and I just threw a whole bunch of math terms to sound smart that people immediately, I'm sure, got turned off. But yes, but
dazzling
there you go.
Logical analysis now.
But basically, like, the curve steepens because you've got the costs at novice tier, and then those costs go up a little bit when you get to journeyman tier, and they go up again when you get to warden and master tiers. Okay. In first edition, the cost because it is, like, for example, roughly speaking, I'm not sure the exact numbers on this, but roughly speaking, for the amount of legend points that it takes to go from circle 5 to circle 6, you can go from from brand new character to circle 5 or almost to circle 5, like something along those lines. Okay.
Very close.
So there comes a point where and this is also plays into the recommended legend awards on the the chart given for the Game Masters, okay?
Your legend chart.
Where the number of adventures and the number of legend awards and the and so forth that you need in order to advance your circle, because that doesn't quite increase at the same rate, there comes a point where some players no longer feel like they are advancing or progressing. At early circles, because you do get to, doesn't cost a lot to get there, you can advance circle 1, circle 2, circle 3, circle 4 relatively quickly. Once you hit that journeyman tier, things start to slow down. And as we were talking, like in the other episode, it's not common, partially because of this, for campaigns to get into 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th circle because of how many legend points you need and how long it takes to a certain extent to earn those to advance. So, if a player no longer feels that they are advancing, and the option is available to pick up a second discipline, and for the amount of legend that it costs for you to advance a couple of your talent ranks, and not really see a whole lot of noticeable improvement as a result of that, where you can pick up an entirely new discipline and advance it 2 or 3 circles and pick up half a dozen new abilities, right? Yeah, it's a whole lot cheaper, and it can feed that, for lack of a better term, Skinner box reinforcement of dinging your level, right? To borrow some video game terms. And so basically what ended up happening is that the commonality of multidiscipline characters, when you look at the stuff back in the 90s of people talking about like posting their characters on websites and discussing their groups and whatnot, the number of multidiscipline characters that you would see in actual play, because of how the mechanics cost factored in, seemed to be kind of out of proportion to the narrative of how difficult it was for an adept to follow a distinctly separate worldview that would be required to unlock the magic of a second discipline. That there was no mechanical reinforcement in a game setting where there was so much mechanical reinforcement of setting-based ideas. There was a disconnect between the mechanics and the narrative, good or ill. I know Lou has mentioned at times in the past that multidisciplining as a concept may have been a mistake in the first place. Okay, that allowing that as an option was an issue.
I also see it as it was going to happen eventually.
Like, and I can recognize that and whatever. Okay. That setting aside that, but there's a big mechanical, like numbers thing going on there where just mechanically it's very easy and very rewarding to, pick up another discipline and like complementary to your primary or whatnot, especially if you're picking up one that has some shared talents. It becomes even easier to accelerate that through your circles because the talents you already have count towards your advancement. You know, the most abusive version of that, of course, is somebody who actually manages to be multi-discipline spellcaster. You know, setting aside the human versatility, picking up other thread weavings to cast multi-discipline spells. If you actually go and are a multi-discipline spellcaster, you can advance through those circles like super, super quick. So,
real quick.
As a way to counterbalance that, basically increasing the cost of those second disciplines by bumping it up a tier, where your second discipline talent ranks basically costs the same as the talent ranks for your primary discipline if you're a journeyman. Okay. At that point, then picking up that second discipline is not quite as mechanically advantageous in terms of your legend awards. I mean, it's still a little bit cheaper because you can pick up some low ranks in whatnot, but it does, I think, mechanically discourage something. And it wasn't just 4th edition. 3rd edition did it. It was looked at in 2nd edition. Like, this was a recognized problem within the Earthdawn community, and different approaches have been made. You know, so that's, I mean, there was a lot of thought that went into that, and basically looking at the numbers and saying, okay, if this is going to be allowed, and not allowing it when you're doing the subsequent editions would have been sacrilegious, I think, within certain areas of things. It's okay, that can of worms has been opened. We've got to allow it. What is a way that we can mechanically, like, not necessarily punish, but disincentivize the ease of which that was done in previous editions? So yeah, so that's basically what it came down to, is that it uses the 3rd edition framework because I was involved in developing the 3rd edition framework for second disciplines. You know, I worked those numbers and said, well, this isn't perfect, but it does more than what it did previously, and makes it a little bit more expensive to pick up those second disciplines so people can do it if they want and, and go from there. It no longer necessarily feels quite as...
Kind of level the playing field then.
Yeah, it no longer feels quite as breaking. Like, I often say that there is, like, you can diversify, pick up a second discipline and dilute or increase the number of tricks that you have available. And that diversity, that versatility, it's like the versatility talent to a certain extent, means that you need to sacrifice a little bit of top end power in order to gain those more abilities. In the first edition point costing system, that basically didn't happen. That the amount that you would spend, you did not lose enough off of your top end to make it anything except an ideal choice, even not necessarily from a pure power gaming standpoint. So that's where it's okay. Let's make it a little bit more expensive, and it works okay. We can't go back and put the genie back in the bottle as far as no, multidisciplining isn't allowed. If we could do that, holy cow! Like the design headaches that we run into, it's really easy if you're looking at a single discipline in isolation to avoid like truly broken combinations. You just don't give them things that are broken, right?
Overlap.
But if you start looking at multidisciplining and versatility, you need to consider the possibility when you are coming up with a new talent, right? That somebody who isn't intended to get it is going to get it. And how does that interact with all of the other 150 talents that have been created? Does this create any potentially like super broken, abusive combos? And that's why a lot of the more bizarre stuff is gated now in the companion. And again, this is something that came out of Morgan's work, is gated as knacks because you can't pick up knacks under versatility. And that at least shuts that down as a potential, abusive avenue. So recognizing where those potential abuse points are and finding ways to gently prevent them from happening.
Nudge.
So yeah, I just did 20 minutes.
So
that was 20 minutes on multidisciplining. We were discussing how long I could go on about Forge Weapon the other day. So
it is not a case of no further thought. Josh just gave you 20 minutes of all that further thought.
There was a lot of thought and a lot of ink, digital and real, spilled over discussions of balancing multidisciplining over the course of the past 30 years.
Yeah, blood, sweat, and tears. So that is it for our email at this time. If you have an email to follow up on anything else we've talked about or something you want us to talk about, next topics that we haven't quite gotten to yet, we'll hold those for those podcasts. But email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And it is now time for the other half of the podcast. We get to talk about threads.
Briefly. Yeah.
Which was that? Yeah, briefly. It was briefly.
But do a little bit of magic theory stuff here.
Because threads work both as a power source to power your spells, and then they also work as an attachment to other items, people, places, and things to imbue your essence into them as well. So threads kind of serve a double duty.
So the way that
we'll try not to get too
the way that I tend to look at it is that the thread is kind of the basic unit of magical energy. And that ultimately a pattern is made up of threads. And so basically when a magician is weaving threads to cast a spell, or an adept is weaving a thread to a magic item, that they are taking a bit of magical energy. And again, I don't necessarily think that this is, that a thread is quantified within the setting to the extent that I'm talking about here, but that basically they are taking a bit of magical energy and using it to add magical power to something, right? Whether that is temporarily in the form of a spell, or whether that is effectively permanent in the case of a magic item.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's kind of the way that I look at it.
Fair. I have actually taken to naming my portable cell phone battery thread. When I travel on business trips, that's my backup power battery for my phone, just in case I'm not near a wall outlet with a USB. I plug it in, and that thing is called thread. So where's my thread?
We all do those sorts of things. I haven't done that, but the like my backup drive is named Great Library.
Yes.
So
there you go. My Kindle, so that I occasionally download some ebooks too, and all that is called the Great Library of Thrall.
Yeah, so this kind of like everything has a pattern, and the pattern is magical energy, basically. Your essence. And I like to think of it as the threads are sort of that basic unit of magical energy.
Yeah. Because when you walk into like an open space park, it has a different energy flow than if you walk into like, say, a crowded arena, or it has a different space than you walk into like your local cafe to get a cup of beverage. So all of those have their own little, and since all of those are named, you have a park name, you have an arena name, you've got a cafe name, just for 3 examples. You've got the name that goes along with that energy to kind of solidify what that feeling is on a cellular level. Yeah. I guess an esoteric type.
Depending on how in depth you want to get with your descriptions and role playing and whatnot, you could.
We don't want to in this one.
Well, but no, I'm like talking about in general. You could certainly like take that notion and extend it to the idea that you could be presenting bits of magic with different flavors, for lack of a better term. Although, to be fair, the sort of support fiction and whatnot of the Earthdawn material doesn't really support or address that much in any way. If you can track down a copy of Prophecy, which is one of the early Earthdawn novels by Greg Gordon.
Oh, yes.
The main character, the primary point of view character in that novel is a wizard. And there is a lot of actually really interesting insight into astral sensing and threads and stuff like that is included in that book. And descriptions of spellcasting as well, in terms of how at least this particular character experiences it.
Yeah. I actually bought that book in bulk. I went on eBay and found it for pretty cheap, actually, and got 6 copies and handed out to all 6 of my players and said, read this, because this is how spells and astral space and all the threads work. And
it's a cracking good yarn as well.
It is. My best takeaway from that novel was the whitewater beverage that the character was able to order. And my players asked where they could get the crystals and a certain beverage, and they make it around the campfire every once in a while on their own, just for a kick. So I allowed that to happen. Since I fed them the novel, So you've got patterns, and everything has a pattern, basically. And the pattern basically being the astral reflection of the thing and its magical nature. And a lot of stuff just has kind of really simple, basic patterns, and there's not much of anything that you need to, special with regards to it. But then you have your true patterns. And this is where you get into your magic items and your people and your named places. Allcroft's Theater in the city of Europa is a named location. And so it has a true pattern. And one of the things that you can do with threads, and this is sort of key to the entire magic item theory of Earthdawn, is that as you learn things about the true pattern of a named person, place, or thing, you can tie a thread to it, connecting your own pattern to that pattern, and that relationship can provide you with bonuses or enhancements, or potentially you can use your own power to increase or enhance the other. A lot of player characters, understandably, use it to enhance their own stuff, but you can use it to support or enhance the existing true pattern. We call that riding the coattails.
Yeah. And so these permanent threads, whether you are using them to enhance magic items or whatever, they do cost legend points to get that bonus because it is a long-term enhancement. And just from within the sort of the framework, anything that you are going to get as a long-term benefit, generally speaking, is going to should cost some legend points. Obviously we give some stuff away for free, blah blah blah. But at that point, but you are making a conscious decision as a player, as a character, to enhance yourself in this way. Now, one of the other cool things that this extends to in terms of magic theory is the ability to deliberately create a true pattern. That is by saying a group of people can perform a magical ritual that creates a true pattern that they can then tie themselves to interact with the group as a metaphysical concept and enhance their own abilities when interacting with said group and pursuing the goals.
AKA the Justice League or the Avengers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right
exactly. Or anything along those lines.
That's the first one I could think of.
and so the other thing that I maybe want to is a direction there, and I'm not coming up with a good segue, so I'm just going to go right into it. There is also... Nope. So at that point, we've talked about magic items, right? You find the name of the item as the first thing, and you gradually increase the key knowledges, and that is a very structured format. You've got the group true pattern, where you create the group, and it is more freeform in terms of what you can provide the bonuses to based on the threads that you weave to it. And sort of an extension of that, it's related to pattern magic, where we're talking about like weaving a thread to a place or to another person, where you need to have a magical item called a pattern item, which is a small related, like not its own magical thing, but is related in some metaphysically important way, either physically or spiritually or whatever to the named place, right? That like by having that, you are able to connect to the larger true pattern through that item. And there is a lot of attempts to use a character's own pattern items in that regard. And I like, if you want to do that, you make a group true pattern. Like that is the purpose of that, I feel. And that the pattern item magic and using pattern items to a person, place, or thing is more intended as a story MacGuffin rather than a particular goal for long-term power increase.
Yeah.
And that, that because of the connection and whatnot that a pattern item has to its progenitor, especially for people, they are very important. I mean, it is basically the loss of a pattern item, the theft of a pattern item that resulted in King Varolus III being killed by the Denerastus. They got a hold of a pattern item and were able to use that as the focus of a ritual to kill him remotely.
Yes.
The dragon statue that appears for the first time in Infected is a pattern item for the Great Dragon Icewing. And he is very interested in getting it back. Understandably. Because, like, that falling into the wrong hands would be devastating, potentially, to him. I mean, he is very powerful, and it would take somebody very powerful to do anything significant to him on that scale. But still, it is potentially, there is much that could be potentially learned from that.
I was thinking of an outside Earthdawn example, which is the Ring of Power for the Lord of the Rings. In his connection to Mordor.
You could certainly do an interpretation of that where because Sauron put some of his power and will into the ring itself, that the ring is not actually a distinct magical item, but that it is a pattern item for Sauron. And if you were doing that sort of in an Earthdawn flavor, you could certainly run it that way, which is why when the ring was destroyed, that it undid him. It's tough to do that sort of thing when you are working under a different magical paradigm. But that's definitely an argument that could be made. You could also certainly have the ring itself be just a magic item that as you gain ranks and are sort of more bonded to it, has more influence and control negatively over you. It is a cursed item in one respect.
Item? Oh, yes. I was just trying to provide an extra example.
Yeah. So, there's that sort of thing, but that a pattern item should be the focus of a story for a particular reason, I think, like generally speaking, then...
Yeah, it's massively important. I wouldn't just have it as a toss-off.
Well, yeah, I mean, they are important. I see questions and discussion come up from time to time about people worried about their pattern items and finding out what their pattern items are and stuff like that. From my own standpoint as a game master and whatnot, I would not want my players to be worried about me being a jerk and taking their pattern item to use against them unless we had already discussed that as a possibility within the game.
Yeah.
I mean, powerful individuals within Earthdawn would absolutely be very interested in keeping track of their pattern items. And I think it is possible fairly easily within the narrative framework of Earthdawn to actually discover that something is a pattern item. Like finding out that something is a magical item is not difficult. And I think that a successful use of item history on a pattern item would reveal basically that it is a pattern item. And at that point, you would need to find out who or what it is a pattern item for in order to be able to take advantage of that. There are other ways to do it, but that's fairly easy to sort of confirm. I would think from my own way that I approach that, but I also approach it as a pattern item, just generic pattern item should have a particular role in a story rather than just something that is being thrown around casually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different ways to approach it. I certainly don't want to poo-poo or like run over anybody's ideas in terms of that sort of thing. But from a magical theory standpoint, from a canon magical theory standpoint, you cannot weave threads to your own pattern items to enhance your power. That the point of a pattern item is in the relationship between two distinct true patterns. It's like basically connecting a battery to itself. You're not going to get any additional charge out of it.
Yeah, you can't recharge your own power bank from itself.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
That basically what's happening when you are weaving a thread between two pattern items is you are allowing magical energy to flow in one direction or another between those true patterns. And if you are weaving a thread to your own true pattern, you're draining energy off to put it right back in. So you're not going to be getting anything out of that. Look, if you want to do something bizarre and handle it differently in your own game, that's fine.
Again, same rule. Be consistent.
Don't ask me questions about it though, because I will look at you funny and, whatever.
Yeah. If it's not in the book. If it deviates.
And the other thing that I want to say is, and we do this a bit, is that more powerful and more advanced examples of, I don't want, maybe to try and wrap up here, unless you have some more points, but maybe to try and wrap up here.
I do.
Broadly speaking, I kind of want magic in Earthdawn, at least certain areas of magic, to still be kind of mysterious and magical. Okay?
Yes.
And I think pattern magic and thread magic is an area where there is a lot of room for that to happen. And when you start getting into larger patterns and interactions and stuff, bizarre things can happen. Especially when you start dealing with powerful figures like, say, Passions or great dragons who know a lot about magic and understand it a lot better. I like doing weird stuff with magic and trying to figure out how it can be a different, like basically, for example, group patterns are a particular slightly off-track expression of otherwise just bog standard pattern magic. Right? Like it is a sort of specifically carved out in its own special case here. And I think there is plenty of room for that to be explored in other areas to make some strange magic. I don't want it all to be like nailed. There are certain aspects of magic, like spell magic and whatnot, that are fairly well understood and nailed down. But when I like to have and see the potential for more esoteric and bizarre and unusual stuff to be out there on the fringes of what we understand magic to be, with scare quotes around that being that it's all fictional anyway and we can make up what we want, but trying to figure out how that fits within the existing understood framework of understanding that ultimately all of magic comes down to the interaction of patterns and the expression of magical power through patterns. Like, how can this sort of be explained in a patterny kind of way, and go from there?
Yeah. No, I just love the fact. I always try and keep in mind that there should be a certain wow factor as well when you get into those way higher level things like pattern items and group patterns. That it's not just no. This is Earthdawn. There is a wow factor. So try and keep that.
The interaction with more powerful pattern magic and the things that might be involved in that should inspire a sense of wonder and perhaps a little bit of nervousness when you are kind of potentially dealing with something that is so potentially,
there should be some
and that can be tough to convey it can be tough to convey in the sense of handling that tone at the table. I certainly understand that it can be tough to convey as far as the presentation in the books, because we want to get the mechanics there and sort of talk about kind of what's going on. But when we're talking about that, how the mechanics work, and when you've only got so much space to get stuff down, and it's a choice between, well, we need to get the mechanic rules in place, or we need to ramble on for 5 paragraphs of esoteric, whatever. the rambling, unfortunately, does kind of tend to end up being the secondary, the words that get cut on the altar of page count. So
yes, that happens. One of those things. Cool. Thank you, Josh, for the enlightenment on threads.
Yeah, I wanted to
about a decade to figure out that the thread was the power, because the word doesn't have an association there otherwise.
So anybody who was sort of paying attention a couple of weeks ago might have noticed that we had a rather deliberate end to our, a deliberate and sudden end to our episode. That was because just as we were wrapping up, my internet went down. Fortunately, we weren't in the middle of an episode, but we were just wrapping up doing our kind of closing thoughts, and my internet went down, and so it was just kind of okay, well then this is where we ended. And what I wanted to lead into was, okay, in one of our next couple of episodes, we're going to be talking about threads and patterns. If you have questions, please send them in, because I know that is an area that a lot of people have questions about. Yes. So I will say, if you have questions about patterns and threads, please feel free to send us an email here, and we will do our best to address them. edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Or other aspects of magical theory.
Or other aspects of magical theory. Alternately, as we have said before, we've got the Earthdawn Guild Facebook group, which is a good group of folks and a lot of people that are there and willing to offer their own 2 cents and ideas and whatnot, understanding that everybody comes at it a little bit differently, and you may run into some things that might seem a little bit off kilter at first, and that's okay. No problems there. People are.
Yeah, because we are only in
but also that everybody is creative and comes at things with their own interpretation and has their own background and understanding and experience of what they're doing with, and ideas of what they want to do with it that may, to more or less extents line up with what we as a development team kind of have in mind for stuff. And some people might want to go a bit more gonzo, and that's cool. I understand that there is a resurgence in some respects to a little bit more gonzo kitchen sink, setting development that you see particularly in the indie community, where you see a lot of stuff that kind of harkens back to the old days of, where you'd have, to talk about D&D for a sec, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which was Dungeons and Dragons, but featured a dungeon that was basically a crashed spaceship. Right. I think that was the mod was Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, where a lot of the monsters that were in it were aliens and had stuff like that. And so you had a really kind of pulp era, mashup sci-fi fantasy kind of stuff that you would sometimes see from the Barsaive books and stuff like that. Some people want to do that with their Earthdawn, and that's cool. And so you may run into that. Of course, alternately, you can follow me on Twitter.
Yeah.
And post me a question there. We've got the FASA Discord, which the links to all of these things I put in the show notes every week. So feel free to check those out.
Absolutely. So that should be the briefest overview we can possibly give you about threads.
It's difficult to discuss them without having specific questions maybe that people want addressed.
Yeah, if you have a character or situation to bring to us, that might help
then it's a little bit easier. I mean, read the sort of workings of magic, the theory chapter in the player's guide kind of covers the basics. Yeah. And I have done what I can to try and clarify and the stuff there. But yeah, like this is one of those areas that I understand can be a little bit weird because it's very kind of metaphysical and a lot more in depth than you get in other role-playing games, and can be maybe a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. But it's also one of the things that makes Earthdawn kind of so special and different. And I am absolutely happy at any time available, of course, to try and help people navigate those difficulties.
Yeah. So, okay, folks, we're at a little bit more than an hour as usual. Otherwise, I thank Josh for keeping the Earthdawn light burning for all of us, getting all those other products coming out for us as fast as they possibly can, and the rest of the team. By all means, they should get all the credit that they deserve as well. So, other than that, folks, we're done for now. We'll see you in a week or so, and thank you for listening. Now, go make your own legend.
Good night.